Hi, I am here with my husband, also known as Watcher Dev, and Scooby Drew. Watcher Dev, who have you brought us today? I saw the name William in my notes. I am partial to that name. True. Since William the Bloody, William the Conqueror, and William the Bastard are all taken, why don't we call him William the Terrible? I think we'll just use his name, William Ritter. Did you know that Ritter means knight? I didn't. Well, I think I will call him William the Knight. You do that.
So today I'm speaking with William about his wonderful book, Bloody Fool for Love, a Spike prequel, which I know Scooby Drew enjoyed very much and said this is pretty much how it all went down.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you enjoy. Hey, this is Watcher Dev. I'm very excited to have William Ritter here, whose book, Bloody Fool for Love, came out in 2022. It was released by Disney and Hyperion. I'm not going to explain it because I think you should give us a synopsis of what the book is.
Sure. This is a Spike novel. It takes place about 100 years before Buffy is even born. So I got to play in a world where Drusilla and Darla and Spike have just separated from Angel. They've just left the Boxer Rebellion, and Spike has just killed his first Slayer, and he's kind of on that high, but then on the low of having lost Angel and then split up the group. So that's where we sit in the sort of Buffy universe. And then the story itself is a supernatural monster caper. I got to write sort of an Ocean's 11 style, breaking in, stealing stuff, fighting bad guys kind of a story, but with characters that I absolutely know and love. So we're watching Spike trying to win back the love and attention of Drusilla, wanting to sort of be the center stage instead of focusing on this loss of Angelus, and along the way making the kind of stupid love puppy mistakes that the Romeo that he is bound to make. That's the story of Bloody Fool for Love.
And where did you set it?
So this is in London. So he's back home. He's gone back to England, and it's set in 1901. So just after they've left Beijing, after the Boxer Rebellion, turn of the century.
Before we get into the nuts and bolts of how you got the job and everything, what I found interesting in the book is how lost they all are without Angelus. Can you talk about that a little bit and where that idea came from?
Yeah, Angelus, in a big way, was sort of the linchpin to the group. Darla is the strongest on her own because she existed before all of the rest of them, but had this pairing that without masters, she had found herself in having a mate and having a partner. And then Drusilla, of course, is obsessed in her own ways with Angelus, as he is her both torturer and maker. And then even Spike, who hates him in many ways, vies against him in many ways, defines himself against Angelus, defines himself as being better or stronger or cooler or sexier than Angelus. And so without having suddenly that foil, they all stumble. They all have that missing piece of themselves. And so that was a big part of writing this book, was that Spike is trying very much to fight against something that isn't there anymore, and to the point that he could have Drusilla all to himself finally in a way that he hasn't for the last 20 years. And finally now he's got a chance to have exactly what he thought he always wanted, but doesn't know how to have that without fighting for it. And so he's suddenly fighting demons that aren't there.
So what's also interesting is how traumatized they are and how they all express the different aspects of trauma. Can you talk about how you kind of explain a lot of things that we don't get explained? Like you explain how Darla ends up going back to Daddy.
Yeah, the show gives you just little snippets. And the title Bloody Fool for Love is an homage to the episode that probably gives us the most of that, Fool for Love, which is season 5, somewhere in the middle. And so we get these little snippets of where Darla's been and what's happened. We know that she did go back to the Master eventually, and then we see her again showing up, opening a hellmouth and so on. But we don't get a whole lot of that actual process. We get just the little pieces of it. So it gave me a lot to play with. These are characters who are very three-dimensional. And as much as the writing itself is beautiful, they don't really come to life until the actors imbue that. And you get Julie Benz giving us the nuance and the layers when she shows up, both in her few Buffy episodes and then even more in the Angel episodes. She's clearly a nuanced character. There's things that she wants. Anytime I'm writing, anytime any author is writing, you're envisioning a character, you're hearing their voice in your head, you're going a little bit crazy as you're being lots of different people in a story. But in a book like this, I got the chance to, of course, have this wealth of episodes to draw off of. And like Julie Benz has this wicked determination and independence, and she wants to sort of be in charge of herself. But also underlying that, there is this weird, almost maternal nature to her relationship with the people that she sired and the further generations beyond that. And she wants this connection to the Master still, and she wants this connection to sort of having her own identity. And all of this is nuanced and layered, and getting to just dive deeper into that instead of just skimming it, instead of just getting a little side, one comment that tells you about a wealth of history. Getting to dive into that was so much fun.
So when you're doing Drew, Drew, do you go around and do you act out Drew? Would I see you in this room walking around pretending to be Drusilla?
I mean, I absolutely talk to myself in crazy ways. I try not to do it outside in the world. I'll take a walk and find myself running through something mouth moving and then see a car driving by and try to act like a normal, sane human being again. But yeah, Drusilla especially is fun because she is the most crazy of them. She is the most disconnected from reality and also weirdly the one most in tune with the reality that everyone else is missing, which is what makes Juliet's performances so wonderful, but also what makes writing the character so much fun. That she is seeing things and experiencing things that other people are not. And so she doesn't care. Like she would happily walk down the street talking to herself and not care what the world sees. And yet at the same time, everyone else sort of expects that she's in this fantasy level and not in tune with the world. But in reality, she's seeing exactly what they're all missing almost every time, that there's some piece of what she's viewing that the rest of them should be seeing and would benefit if they could see too.
One of my favorite parts of the book is right at the end where she's talking to Spike, and I don't want to spoil it. Please read the book. It's an amazing book. But she gives him some advice. And her intention is always pure. It's sometimes her delivery that is confusing. And I think what you give in the book is Spike beginning to understand her thought process.
I love Juliet Landau and I love Drusilla as a character. Ironically, in order to really get that across, I wound up deleting some of the scenes that I had with Drew earlier because a big part of the point of the story, this is a Spike story, and the point of it was him not getting that he could be with her. And so he's actually spending more time away from her in an effort to sort of win her throughout the beginning of the book. That was a big part of it. Him missing the cues that she's giving him early on and throughout the book. Finally, toward the end, as he takes her with him onto the caper, that's the point when he starts finally realizing, oh, like, yes, we're on this dance together. We can have this wonderful caper together. And all the little pieces that she's said along the way start to click in. And ultimately, she saves the day. Him listening to her saves the day. Him finally listening and being in tune with her makes it so that he's able to survive through the end of this cataclysmic final scene. And that was definitely intentional.
How did you get the job writing this book?
Such a strange one. Algonquin Young Readers was my publisher for a very, very long time. And it is tragic to me that by the time this airs, it will be about the last month before Algonquin finally closes their doors forever. Algonquin Young Readers, Algonquin still exists and is a great publisher. But Hannah Allman was a woman who worked in the early years, first and second years of Algonquin Young Readers existing as a sub-imprint. And she was, I think, just an intern on my very first book, which was Jacoby, and helped out with various aspects of the sort of Jacoby project, and then went on, as people do in the publishing world. It's a very small world, and wound up working for Disney Hyperion and was there at just that perfect time to be hearing that they needed somebody to write a turn-of-the-century caper sort of fun story with supernatural elements, and went, hey, I know a guy who's written turn-of-the-century supernatural caper kinds of stories with just that right tone. And so she recommended to the editors that they reach out to me. And so it was through my agent, Hannah Allman, reached out and said, hey, we've got this secret project that I can't tell you anything about. You'd have to sign an NDA even to learn more, but dropped enough hints to get that this was a vampire-themed project based on an old IP, and nothing leapt to mind other than Buffy that would be what I would want to be working on in that world. And sure enough, came out that that's just what it was. I signed my NDAs and got the info. And while I was waiting to find out, there's just a couple of days between signing the NDA and finding out what the project was. I was thinking like, okay, if this is Buffy project, which at that point I was pretty sure it was, there's lots of great characters I'd love to see, backstories on. I'd love to see interesting things. There were only two that I felt like I would be the right person to write. Like I would love a Willow story. I'm not the person to write a Willow story. Like I'd love a Cordelia story. Like I'm not the person to write a Cordelia story. But I was like, I would love a Giles story. Like I would love to jump into that. And even more than that, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be heaven to write Spike? Wouldn't that be a fun, like writing a villain story? And then I got the email saying it was a Spike book. And I was, oh my God, yes, I would love to take on this project. So they gave me the chance to write a pitch, essentially. It wasn't even a guaranteed job. It was the chance to write a pitch. And I was on deadline for another book. I was writing the Oddmeyer series at the time, and the pandemic was hitting at that moment. I think this was 2020. We were just dealing with all of that right when I first got the introduction to it. So I said, I want this. I'm going to take the time to write the pitch. And so I took a chunk of time away from the project I was working on to write an outline and just a concept and a first chapter or two, and sent that over with the understanding that I wouldn't be able to really devote myself to it for another couple of months, as I had to go back and finish up. And they apparently liked it. The first chapter was more or less what would become the first chapter of the book. There's a scene with them essentially in a basement being miserable as they've just gotten back to London, and Spike is dissatisfied. And more or less that became a big part of the book. And I was just over the moon finding out that it was enough, that they were excited about it. And then I got to spend the next several months between finishing one project and starting this one. It was the pandemic, and I got to just binge Buffy episodes as my job. And I got to tell my wife, oh, I'm so sorry. I can't help out and pick up as much because I'm working right now. And then I'd go out in the garage and watch Buffy episodes for hours on end and feel terribly guilty.
Does the publisher have we want a Spike story, we want a Giles? Do they have those ideas already and they bring them to you and then you create the framework?
Yeah, in this case, yes. IP works differently for different people. There's different projects that are very explicit, like here's the exact characters that we need involved, and here's the basic plot, and you're basically just filling in the details. And then there's others that are, write me a story about this character, figure it out. And so this one was a little bit of a mix of both. There was a lot more freedom than I even expected, but basically they knew they wanted some backstories. They wanted something Buffy existing. And so there were a few different characters that they wanted backstories of, and Spike was one of them. And so other than Spike, probably London, probably 1901. They knew roughly where in the plot they could plug in a Spike story without it messing with too much of the existing canon. They said, that's basically it. We want it to feel very sort of adventure paper. They had that kind of vibe. But beyond that, it was very much, welcome to the toy box, have fun with the toys, put them away when you're done. And so I got to decide what that caper was and what I was doing with them.
You talked about Fall for Love being a linchpin episode. What were the other linchpin episodes that you watched that you think helped you tell this story?
Their introductory episode, of course, is a big part of it, just for character. The chemistry between Spike and Drew in their first scenes is so powerful and toxic. And that's a big part of their relationship. As much as I absolutely love Sarah Michelle Gellar and James have great chemistry as well, it's different. And their chemistry is reserved, and necessarily so, in good ways, is reserved because there is that, he's the bad boy and I should not be dating him, even if there is interest there. But for Juliet and James, it was just raw, let's be passionate. Let's lean into each other's worst qualities and bring out the worst in each other. And that's such an interesting, fun, dangerous combination. And of course, those kinds of relationships in real life are bad. I think the show very intentionally used the monsters to be those metaphors. We talked about this before, monsters as the metaphors for real life, especially young adult life. And they were the metaphor for that kind of relationship, that you see those people in high school who can't stop making out in the hallways, and those people who are just passionate and then also have the massive breakups that lead to, lamps being thrown across the room and that sort of thing. And so this was the kind of relationship that they had that was so intense and powerful. There's episodes that you get just little hints of Spike's character in particular. I can't think of a specific episode, but Angel especially, you get more of Julie Benz getting to just sort of show who she is as a person. And then she, of course, gets sort of brought back in ways that she wasn't back, 100 years ago, but it gives you some nuance into what she was like and what was going on inside her, sort of her monster brain back then. It's just little pockets all throughout the series, which again, like I mentioned, usually you're only getting in a side remark, or you're only getting in sort of a wistful look. And those little moments that build up to, this character is haunted by something that happened, those kinds of things. So I love seeing any of the William Pratt stuff. I love seeing the bloody awful poet stuff. I love seeing any of sort of Julie Benz fighting with wanting to be two different parts of herself, wanting to be this bold independent and wanting to have that sort of connection. Even Angelus, who plays an important role in the book, but off-scene. Angelus also is this complex, multifaceted character, even back then, even as the monster that he was as Angelus is a monster with layers, with nuance. So it's hard to pinpoint a single episode because they're just all over the place.
Well, what's interesting about what you're talking about here, William, is it's that permission to be really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the worst part of a human. It's the petty, cruel, not nice part of yourself that you allow out. And there is something fun about being in that world. And what I think you achieve brilliantly in the book is he's not a hero at that point, but he is the hero because we've all been in love. And we've all had that feeling.
It leans into exactly that. Yeah. When vampires become vampires in Buffy canon, the good parts of them die and the bad parts of them survive. So you get William Pratt's mother, for example, still remembers every memory that she ever had with her son, but all of the loving maternal instincts are gone. And now she's just this miserable, awful, catty wench. And similarly, what makes Spike so much fun to write is that his love was always a toxic trait. And so it was always actually kind of a bad part of him. And he can't not be a Romeo. He can't not love passionately in unhealthy ways because that's part of who he is. He began his first love in the series is this woman that he's reading poetry to that he absolutely loves. And just like we see Romeo pining over Rosalind before he immediately falls in love with Juliet, we see Spike pining over this woman in a back alley before he's bitten by, ironically, a Juliet and falls in love with Drusilla. And so we get this toxic Romeo love is core to his monster that is both sweet, and it's something that we resonate with because, the lover is one of the hero archetypes, but it is also toxic. It is also nasty. And that's part of what I loved about the original series, was that carries out right up until the final season, when he finally, after 7 years of being this person and seeing himself in a weird way as both the villain and the hero, he finally sees the other side of what that villain really is. He finally sees the lover as being a bad thing in that final moment when Sarah Michelle Gellar has to fight him off, and he gets to recognize, I finally actually want to be good, which is such, again, powerful acting by James.
You just gave me goosebumps. That was such a good answer. How did you go about getting Spike's voice?
James Marsters absolutely kills it throughout the series. I love the writing. Of course, the writers all throughout have done an amazing job giving him an interesting character. But there is that you can't not love James while also recognizing that he's bad throughout the series. You understand that he is wrong. And so the easy answer is also the most honest one. Watching the series, watching the show, watching James perform this character makes it easy to picture that in your mind. I've had 8 other books that I've published and many other projects I've worked on where the characters are entirely in my mind, and I've got an image for them. I've got a voice for them in my mind. But this was one where I get the cheat code of having James right there in my head as I'm writing. And the way that he would deliver a line informs how I write it. And sometimes I'll write a line because it's good and it's clever and it's witty, and I write it and I go like, nope, that's not how he would write this. That's not how he would say this line. And so, James in my head is telling me like, no, say it like this. And so I get that slight different variation on who the character is just because he's alive so much on screen.
One of the things that was a highlight for me is there's a group of James fans, and I introduced you to them on Facebook, and they all read your book. And to get their approval on Spike's voice is like the real deal. You have to really do it right, because those people will know more. I mean, Gene Caldwell, Adrian, Erin McCormack, they're all super James fans. And if they say it's good, it's really good, because they will hold you to such a high standard in regards to that character.
I was so nervous before it came out, worrying about exactly that, because I know how it is when I read a book. I've read lots of IP work, and, Christopher Golden does an amazing job. And reading a book with a character and having it not feel right is just a killer. It ruins the book, makes it not good. And so I was so hopeful that I could hit that.
I really want people listening to this to read this book. Juliet started doing the rewatch. They're a good line on top of good line on top of good lines on top of great lines. The show is full of incredible writing. It's like unbelievable. And to take that on, there's not many shows that have that. You really think about people getting tattoos and quoting lines. That show has so much of that. That must have been somewhat intimidating to be like, I'm going into that world.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, absolutely. The writing was phenomenal. And I think that's one of the reasons why Golden, I think, writes so well, is that he, similarly, is that clever line after clever line. In narrative, also, you then get the added layer of needing the narrator to reach that level, because on screen you can just have the dialogue hits there, boom, boom, boom. And so each of the words spoken are going to be clever words, and the action will play out itself, and that's fine. But now even the action in a novel has to feel like it fits with those clever words that the dialogue has. And so the action has to feel like it's a character in its own right. I think there's some fantastic writers who I try to model myself off of often. And writers like Terry Pratchett, for example, is one of my favorites, who his narrator is as alive as any of the characters throughout his writing. You get that clever ways of phrasing things, ways that you can tell it's third-person omniscient narrator. The way it's not Spike's brain, but the narrator is clearly seated inside Spike's brain in ways that sort of you're seeing things through that character's lens, or other characters as we hop to different roles, as we're focusing on different people in different scenes. Sometimes it's Drew, or sometimes it's Darla, or sometimes it's other characters. And that's fun. It's fun to think of that narrator as being on the same level as the kind of dialogue that we've seen on the screen.
I'm a big fan of this book. I'm going to keep saying how much I love it, because I do really love the book, right? So one of the things I love that you achieved is Drusilla is the object of desire, but she's also kind of proactive and defined in the story. How did you go about achieving that?
Drusilla is brilliant. She is smart. She sees things that other people don't see, and she's strange, and she marches to her own beat. And playing with that is fun. Seeing the ways that she processes things differently than everyone else is fun. And putting yourself inside that mind is a joy. And again, having watched the show over and over and again, you watch those performances, you watch Juliet's performances, and it's so easy then to allow that in through your own eyes, to allow those moments to play out. So yeah, I feel guilty for having been paid for it in some ways, because it was getting to play with somebody else's toys, and it was such a pleasure.
What do you think Spike and Drew give each other?
Purpose, I guess. For Spike, I think Drusilla is very much that reason to be a lover, that he, again, can't turn it off. He has to be that lover. And she gives him that drive. She gives him a person on whom whom to hang all of his obsessions. And that is both good and bad, of course. It is what eventually Buffy will take over and be for him, but I think in maybe healthier ways. And so because he is so obsessed with her and she gives him that purpose, that also then drives everything else. Everything he does, every ambition he has, whether it's, killing the Slayer, whether it's gaining prestige in the community, all of that is then layered on top of her, that she is that person that he gets to be obsessed with, that goal upon goals. And for Drusilla, I think she was tortured. Like, that was how she became who she is, and that became central to her as a vampire. And she craves that torture in some really unhealthy ways. And again, I think the show did a nice job of reflecting the worst parts of growing up and developing as a human being, especially as a young woman. And so she sort of reflected that. What is it like having been in an abusive relationship? What is it like having been hurt, having been tortured, and then somehow sort of needing that while also needing kindness? And we talked about there's ways that, especially sexually or romantically, vampires are often a metaphor for the ways that people play out fantasies and play out romances. And for her, she was part of this nasty, nasty romance. And now she's with someone who loves her unconditionally, and she still needs that negative. She still needs the torture and the pain. And because they're so toxic to each other, they kind of provide that to each other. But he also provides the love that she wasn't getting in a big way from Angelus. She gets the actual love from him that she would never have gotten from Angelus, that he wasn't capable of giving. And so I think they feed each other in that way. But also in that way, she benefits from him and then looks away because she's still interested in this other person, which feeds into his need to have this tortured, anguished lover. It just builds into that wonderful, powerful, charismatic, but very toxic love.
What do you think the metaphor of the book is to you? What do you think the book means to you?
Yeah, so throughout the series, the vampires become this metaphor for sort of the kinds of relationships you should avoid and the dangers of loving someone you shouldn't love. Whereas in this book, jumping into that monster, I got to sort of play with the demons are the demons inside your own head more than anything else. As much as Spike is literally fighting vampires and demons and other creatures, werewolves and things, in a big way, the biggest demons that he's fighting are the ones inside his own skull, that he wants things that he could have if he would just get out of his own way. And so even though we get some literal monsters in the way, very much the metaphor then is getting out of your own way, recognizing that you don't have to fight the demons, that you can have the things that are right in front of you if you would just let yourself love, let yourself live without needing that.
Do you know if James knows about the book or has read it?
I don't know if he's read it. I know that he is at least aware of the book in kind of a mortifying way. I draw often. I illustrated the Oddmeyer series, and anytime I'm writing a book, even if it's not going to be remotely illustrated, I'll sketch things along the way. And so I had sketched a number of different pictures, but one of them in particular of the James version of Spike with his hair sort of longer and slicked back the way it was in the Fool for Love era. I liked the image and I had it kicking around. And then as I was done writing and it was just in its pre-production phase and getting ready to go out into the world, I had started playing around with some editing software just to make very simple animations. And I wound up making myself this cute little animation of one of the scenes, just more as an exercise for myself to see if I could do it. And then played with that and said, I could make like a book trailer that I could put out for a handful of people that are going to see it on my TikTok feed or whatever. I can put out this little book trailer. And so it built and got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And I did the voice, just using my own voice to do my best impersonation of James as Spike, and did this little mini scene, got permission to use some music for the background, and sort of made this trailer. And I asked my editor, like, hey, is it okay if I put this out? A handful of people, 100 people, will see this on my TikTok, but is that all right for me to put this out there? And she said, hold on, we got to check. There's certain rules about this rights and things like that. So just let me make sure that we've got permissions to do that. And so I waited. And I assume she's talking to somebody at, Disney Hyperion and, some CEO and just making sure boxes are checked. And then she got back to me and said, yeah, James looked at it and said, it's okay, give it a thumbs up. And so I'm realizing after the fact that not only has this man seen my drawing of him, he's also heard my impersonation of his voice. It's just like, oh my God, mortifying. So he gave the thumbs up for my book trailer about my own book, which is embarrassing and sweet and wonderful. So apparently he didn't hate that, at least. I have no idea if he's read the book. And I'm, again, a little terrified if he does, because I know he is protective and is very honest about properties when he likes the way that they've been portrayed in comics, for example, when he's wanted things altered. And I love that. I love that he's possessive of the character because it's him. It doesn't exist without him. I know he's even done some of the writing for the post-TV show projects, and I think that's awesome. So if he ever does, please know it was written with nothing but love, James. I hope that he appreciates it.
Juliet read the book and she loved it. She's going to say hi.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm a huge, huge fan of yours.
Oh, thank you. I loved your book. You really captured Drew's voice so beautifully.
That means so much to hear you say that. I tried so hard. You imbue the character with so much on screen. So it's absolute honor to hear you say that.
Oh, thank you. I'm so thrilled that we're going to get to share this interview with everybody that's been listening to our podcast. I cannot wait for them to hear the interview and for them to read your book.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the podcast myself.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Take care.
Did you see the show when it came out, or did you see it after?
Yes, I was in high school, probably a freshman or so when it first came out. And so it was that cool show that was, slightly older characters. And so you're young and like, oh yeah, there's the cool hot young things doing cool action. And I was always a fantasy fan, a nerd. Actually did my first straightforward rewatch of the show in college and just, episode by episode. It's brilliantly written that you can enjoy it episodically. You can enjoy just a single, one shot. You can tune in for that sort of monster of the week approach, and it's fun, but it definitely hits differently to actually get to know the characters and to follow through and enjoy them one at a time. One of my favorite episodes is actually Once More with Feeling, which is, I think, season 6. It's much later on. It's become sort of a big thing at cons, and people occasionally get together for annual rewatches. But it's the musical episode, and I think so many shows have tried to capture the magic of that episode since and failed.
Is there any chance we can get a sequel to Bloody Fool for Love?
Talk to Disney Hyperion on that one. I would love to. I would love to write a sequel. It was well received by fans, as you mentioned. I'm grateful for that. So I'm glad that it wasn't, one of those, oh, it was terrible, we'll never touch it again. So I'm hopeful that it does well enough that they're interested. I do know, though, and I encourage people to check out, there are other books coming out right now by other authors who are playing in the world in the same way. And I think that was always their goal from the start. So the goal wasn't to write a Spike series. The goal was to do a handful of sort of back in the past, take a look. Here's a Tara book. Here's what happens in the future book. Kendara Blake, such a phenomenal writer. And I hope that people will check out her book. In Every Generation, I think, is the first. And then she's done now 3 in that sequel series. So I'm so grateful, so proud to have been part of this set of books that are now coming out, just expanding the universe a little and playing with different things. No immediate plans to make a sequel, but I'd be there for it. If anyone's listening, I'm on board, absolutely.
Is it in your head? Do you have it in your head already?
I've written a number of books with sequels, wrote the Jacoby series and the Oddmeyer series. And as I get near the end of a book, I always think, I'm wrapping things up. These are going to be done. Oh, but what if I see this next little thing? What if there's room for this? So there's just a little bit of that at the end of Bloody Fool for Love, because I can't not think of what would the next caper be? Where are they headed? So I'm happy for that to be just in the minds of readers, but it absolutely is in my own mind. I have directions that I would go with it if I played.
I love your villain. Talk about creating your big bad. Have you ever been to England?
I've not. I would love to. No.
He's based on an English gangster, isn't he? Kind of. Is he like a Ray Winston, Vinnie Jones type? How do you see him?
I hear a very, like Vinnie Jones, that kind of voice, or Jason Statham kind of a voice in my mind when I'm playing him up here. I've got loads of family from England. I've got friends from England. One of my dear friends who actually works in the convention world in a big way has been curating a number of museum events for Marvel. Fantastic stuff. His name is Ben Saunders. He was a professor at the U of O when I attended University of Oregon. And Ben also grew up in England and big nerd, really enjoys the comics world, that kind of stuff. And I let him know that I'm writing this IP project, and he was very supportive and happy for me. And I got near the end phase and the editorial phase, and we're looking through, and they were looking at swears, and so they're looking at like bloody is right there on the title. And, in England, that's a bigger deal than it would be in America. In America, it's whatever, that's cute. Ron Weasley says that, whereas in England, it's considered an actual swear, and it's YA. And so we were looking through, and there were a number of different places where they said, you can't use this, because, I looked up the word, and like bugger, for example. And they said, no, you can't use it. This refers to like an act of sodomy. It's potentially homophobic. And I said, maybe technically there is some connotations that could be drawn there. And so I wound up calling up my friend saying like, hey, as someone who grew up, little kid in England, if someone from England were to read this book. And so he wound up being my English swears colleague. And so he just went through, felt very strange, sending a former teacher and a good friend, here's a list of all the naughty things. Are they okay? Would they fly? And he was like, my mother called me a little bugger all the time. That cheeky little bugger. So no, I don't think that would be a problem at all. It's like, it was very supportive in giving me the inside view for him. So I have a number of people in my life. I try to have sensitivity readers like that, even for white male British voice is not that far from my own. But even then, there's that sort of little sensitivity there.
Describe what the character looks like and what he is.
Gunnar is a big, thick sort of mountain of a man demon, and he has the ability to sort of produce spikes. He's based on demons that exist in canon. They, produce spikes from various different places, but he's meant to be this big, thick, intimidating bruiser, but he's also a gentleman. I kind of imagine him as the kind of English gentleman who started his life as like a butcher in the streets, kind of beating people up and managed to get into gentry. And so that's his sort of world where he wears finery. He makes his underlings wear suits and ties. He wants that look, but also he tortures people in his dungeon. casually, like he doesn't even think about it. Yeah, he gets annoyed at somebody who loses his arm at one point and says, "Oh, you bleed on the rug, get out of here." He's mad at him for getting the tapestries bloody as opposed to caring about his hemorrhaging arm. He's got like the visceral, violent side of him is just natural. He's a demon. It's what he does. It's both his business and his pleasure. But being a gentleman is sort of what he's decided that he is. And being in London is the best place to do that. And so he's taken joy in having power over everyone else. That sort of gangster mentality that you mentioned, in a big way, he wants the power of knowing that he controls everything. It's that very controlling mindset. And so he sort of takes in these pets, these ideas of, I want to own everything. And if you work for me, I own you and no one else can, and I won't ever let you go. And so that sort of drives this. He has the meaty thug physicality, but he wants that. So he's the king in his own mind. It was a pleasure to write Gunnar. Yeah.
You give Miss Edith a history. Can you talk about, without spoiling it too much, we actually find out why Drusilla has such an attachment to Miss Edith.
I'm so happy they let me do that. Miss Edith is canonically the doll that Drusilla carries around and speaks to regularly. No sugar for you, Miss Edith has been bad, and that sort of thing. And she is such a part of the show. We see her so regularly in the show with no explanation as to where she's coming from. And I imagine she was probably written simply to play at Drusilla's childlike nature, that she was still relatively young when she was turned, and she has these childlike innocent ways. But I delighted in seeing her and kind of wondered about that. And I was almost sure that once I gave her a backstory that they would tell me, no, you can't do this. There's something that you missed. There's some detail. There's some mention, a brief 2-second mention in an episode that you didn't notice in Angel where it's explained where she picked up this doll. And it wasn't. And so I was able to give her this backstory. But I love the idea of this, the haunted doll concept is fun for me. Drusilla, and only Drusilla, treats the doll as though it's a person. So giving a reason for that she again is seeing something that others do not. And by the end of the book, I left it just that little bit open-ended as to whether or not it is 100% the way Drusilla sees it, or whether she is just a little bit wacky in her own ways. But I'm so happy that they let me keep that. Thank you, Britt, for allowing me to keep that in the book.
What are you working on now?
I've got a more modern concept, post-apocalyptic concept with, again, lots of demons. I can't seem to get my brain away from the supernatural. More illustrated concepts, because I like playing with the art side of things. I've enjoyed that. I'm happy to recommend, if you're interested, if you read Bloody Fool for Love and enjoy it, thank you so much. The Jacoby series and Oddmeyer series are my previous YA and middle grade works. Feel free to check those out.
What's your approach between writing for both oldies like me and young adults? Is there a difference in the way you think?
Yeah, I'm a teacher as well. I teach young adults. I teach high school English, and so I get to share books and share love of reading with students. And from that angle, I'm able to appreciate that young adult is a very broad category. There's young adult stuff that people refer to as clean, although I don't love that term because it implies that sex is dirty, or people who have lived real lives are dirty in some way. And then there's young adult books that deal with drugs and violence and sex and all these kinds of things in ways that are healthy and age appropriate. And I think that's important. When I first started writing YA must be easier, and writing middle grade and then children's must be easier, of course, because it's, simpler words and it's, shorter stories and things like that. I'd written the Jacoby series for young adults, so, written for sort of the age demographic that I teach, but with lots of room for adults to enjoy as well. And then I opted to write middle grade for the Oddmeyer series because I had boys who were at that age. I had my own sons who are at that age where I wanted to write a book that they could enjoy, could read for story time. And it has a lot of heart connected to my family. And one of the things that I realized when writing middle grade was that it was in some ways easier because it's shorter, but in other ways, weirdly, it was harder. That writing for adults, you can get away with being wordier. You can get away with saying things in 20 words that a young reader will only stick around for the first few. You want to convey the same level of emotions, the same degree of excitement, and the plot needs to be intriguing in similar ways, but you have to do it in a way that stays constantly exciting. And like you were mentioning, the Buffy series is great about one line after another is just engaging and fun. And that's why young readers love stories like that. Their attention span is short enough that they need that good one-liner after another. And adult books, you can spend a chapter or two being, a little introspective and wordy and have no action really progress for a little while and then get back into it. And adults will be patient with you for that and children won't. And so in that weird way, I realized that young adult writing is, in fact, just as difficult and difficult in ways that adult writing is not. I'm not to say that adult writing isn't difficult in ways that young adult writing is not also. There's nuance both ways. But it made me respect a lot more the young adult and even children's book writers, that you want to convey these same themes and important messages, but you have to do it in ways that stay line by line good and exciting. My mother is the person who made me love reading. She was an English teacher and a linguist. She still is an avid reader. And at one point, she had said something, she used a big word for something. I said, what does that word mean? She means happy or whatever. And I said, so why don't you just say happy? And she explained to me, I don't use a big word because I want to sound smart. I use it because it's the only word that my brain can think of at the time. It actually takes more steps and more work for me to come up with what's the simple way of saying that. And that stuck with me as I became an adult, that writing for middle grade actually requires that additional step because my brain automatically goes to how would I say this as an adult? And sometimes I have to find the more nuanced way of saying it for kids that makes it more approachable.
It's interesting that Buffy continues because of its restrictions. You have amazing shows that are written really well, but they're not going to go generation to generation to generation because you can't watch it. A lot of those shows you can't watch with your children. What's interesting in rewatching the first season of that show has so many metaphors. The invisible girl, the witch, the mother-daughter dynamic, the pack. Those are amazing episodes. They're dealing with real issues that people go through, not just at school, but actually into your adult life. There's still that pack of people that are cool and will bully you.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about the Spike arc in Buffy is especially that the metaphors are so important. And we see that sort of in the show itself, we get that nice buffer that we're talking about violence and mean girl cliques and sex and, boys that you shouldn't date and all of that stuff. And early on in the show, the metaphors are so clear and obvious. And we get the yep, Spike is a bad boy, shouldn't date a bad boy. And then as he comes into sort of being more interesting, we get that okay, we're going to see him be a bad boy, but we're going to use playful metaphors to keep it from hurting too much. There's actually a great scene, I think it's in season 6. He's just been microchipped and he goes to kill Buffy and he goes into her dorm room and Willow is there instead of Buffy. And he tries to kill Willow and can't and gets shocked and sort of sits back. And they play it off as this, oh, it's funny, it's not you, it's me, and it becomes this funny, coaching a boy in a dorm room through, his inability to perform, and it becomes this funny sort of sex metaphor. But when you step back just a little bit more, it becomes all the more problematic, because this was not a funny sex moment, this was an attempted assault. And when you add sex to that, it becomes an attempted sexual assault, and it becomes this really scary moment that the show allows the metaphors to buffer for you. And so you get this nice buffer. And what the show does as it grows up is you start with these high school kids, and then they're college kids, and then by the end, they're adults really. And you find, like I mentioned, you get that traumatic scene in the bathroom where Spike is forcing himself on Buffy. And in essence, it's the same scene, but we've taken the metaphor away. And he's no longer there as monster, he's there as man. And that is all the scarier. And it is all the more intense. And it's when he finally sees through the metaphor and sees him for what he is and doesn't want to be that anymore. And what an amazing series to have taken its audience with that carefully by the hand to say, look, you're dealing with hard things. Yes, we're getting, and now you're mature enough to be able to deal with it. Here's what it is. You can fight. You can protect yourself. This is important. You don't have to be that. And so well done. I think the series was brilliant.
This has been an amazing interview. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. You're such a good interview, and I'm so excited. Let's work on trying to get a sequel.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much for having me. It's absolute delight, and all my best.
Bye, William.
Take care.
That was a bloody good interview with William the Knight. William Ritter. See you soon when we'll do it again. Do it again.